The alien station was alive with noise. Engines hummed, strange voices echoed, and lights from 100 species flickered in every corner. Merchants shouted in languages that clicked, hissed, or growled, selling food that smelled both sweet and sour. The giant market hall was filled with energy, yet in the corner of this endless crowd sat a single human. He was thin, his face pale, and his hands shook from hunger. No one paid him much attention, because to the aliens around him he was weak and unimportant. He pressed a hand to his stomach, which growled loudly, but no food was in reach. The human had no money, no credits, nothing but an old instrument strapped to his back. It was dusty, scratched, and looked fragile compared to the shining alien tools around him. He had traveled far, but now he was stranded here, in a place where no one cared about a starving traveler. Still, his eyes carried a spark, the kind of spark that refuses to die, even when everything else seems broken. He slowly stood up and walked toward a food stall. The stall was run by a tall alien with green scales and sharp teeth. His 4 eyes blinked in different directions and his voice hissed like steam escaping. The human looked up and said, his voice tired but clear, "Sir, please, I need food." The alien looked down and sneered. "Food is for those who pay, weakling. What will you give me, scraps of your bones?" The human swallowed, his throat dry, and touched the strap across his back. He pulled the old instrument forward, its wooden body glowing faintly in the bright station lights. "I can play music," the human said softly. "I can play for food." For a second, the alien was silent. Then his 4 eyes blinked again, and he let out a sharp laugh. "Play? What nonsense is this?" the alien barked. "This is no village market. This is the largest station in the sector. Do you think sound will fill my stall? Do you think I care for human noises?" Other aliens turned their heads, curious. A small insectoid alien clicked its jaws, a large armored warrior grunted, and even a floating energy being pulsed with dim light. The sneering vendor leaned closer, his teeth sharp like knives. "Play for food? Fine, human, play. Let us see your little trick. Maybe it will make the crowd laugh before they eat. Maybe that is worth something." The human nodded, his hands shaking, but not from fear alone. His hunger made his body weak. He found a small empty spot near the stall, a corner where the shadows met the lights. He sat down slowly, placing the instrument across his knees. The crowd began to gather, some laughing, some whispering, all curious. "Look, the human thinks sound is currency," one alien snorted. "Maybe his song will break glass," another hissed. The human closed his eyes, and for a moment, he did not hear their voices. He remembered Earth, though far away. He remembered the wind in the trees, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of people he once knew. He pressed his fingers against the strings, and his other hand held the bow. He took a deep breath, and then the first note rose into the air. It was soft, almost fragile, yet it carried far in the noisy market. The laughter stopped for just a second, as if the sound cut through the heavy air. The human played another note, then another, and the melody began to grow. It was not just music, it was a story. The sound carried sadness, hope, longing, and something deeper that no alien machine had ever made. The crowd shifted, their laughter fading, their voices lowering. The insectoid stopped clicking its jaws. The armored warrior tilted his head, and the glowing being pulsed brighter. The sneering alien vendor froze, his 4 eyes narrowing as the sound washed over him. The human's hands moved faster. Though weak, they found strength in the music. Each note cut into the silence, pulling memories even from those who thought they had none. A warrior felt a sting in his heart. Remembering a battlefield, a childlike alien felt tears form. Though it had never wept before, the crowd grew larger, pressing closer, the noise of the market fading behind them, and still, the human played. The sneering vendor's smirk was gone now, replaced by something else, something he did not understand. The human's body trembled, but his eyes remained closed, lost in the song. It was not just music for food anymore. It was survival, it was proof. It was a voice screaming in silence. The market, once loud with shouts and laughter, was now silent. All that remained was the sound of a starving human, playing his heart into the strings. And when the last note faded, there was no laughter, no sneer. Only silence deep enough to shake the air. The human lifted his eyes slowly, weak but unbroken, and the aliens around him stared, their faces unreadable. The sneering vendor opened his mouth, but no words came out. The first part of the human story had begun, and the station would never forget this moment. The silence after the last sound was heavy. Every alien eye was fixed on the human, and yet none spoke. The crowded market, once a storm of voices and haggling, had fallen still, as if the very air refused to move. The human's chest rose and fell, his breath shallow, but his fingers did not stop. He lifted the bow again, and this time the strings sang louder, clearer. It was the beginning of something greater, the first note of a new melody that would test every heart in that station. At first, the sound was soft, like water dripping in a cave, echoing into places no light touched. Then it grew stronger, filling the wide hall, chasing away the ordinary noise of engines and chatter. Aliens who had never cared for humans now leaned forward, their faces tight with something strange, something they could not name. The sneering vendor crossed his forearms, his teeth still bared, but his eyes betrayed unease. He wanted to mock, but his throat felt closed. The human played on, his body trembling with hunger, but his spirit pushing beyond weakness. He was no longer begging, no longer asking, he was declaring, through sound, that he existed. The first note had opened the door, and now the melody walked inside every listener's mind. A winged alien with silver feathers dropped its goods, forgetting the price it had argued for only moments ago. A reptilian trader grunted, clutching his chest as if something long buried had stirred awake. Even a mechanical being, its face made of cold steel and red lights, tilted its head, as though the music touched wires no machine had planned for. The human's eyes remained shut, but inside visions of Earth flowed. He saw the blue skies, the wide oceans, the forests that whispered with life. He remembered laughter, hands holding his, the faces of people who were gone. He poured those memories into the strings, each note heavy with longing. The aliens did not understand Earth, but they understood longing. They felt it crawl into their bones, like a hidden truth they had forgotten. The sneering vendor slammed his hand on the stall, trying to shake off the feeling. Noise, he growled. But the word was weak even to his own ears. No one listened to him now. The human's second melody rose like fire. It began gentle, then grew fierce, pulling at every heart. A warrior alien scarred from battles, remembered comrades lost, their names echoing in silence. A childlike creature clutched its parent's hand tighter. Eyes wide as strange wetness gathered the market. Once the noisiest place in the station, was now silent but alive, alive with feeling. Alive with pain, alive with awe. The human's music was not only sound, it was a mirror. Every note showed the aliens something within themselves, something raw and unguarded, and for the first time, they could not hide behind armor, scales, or pride. The sneering vendor's smirk had turned into tight lips, his four eyes darting around, seeing the crowd he had not expected. This was no simple trick, no weak human entertainment. This was power, the human, unaware of the storm he was building, played on. His hands moved like they had a life of their own, though his body cried for food and rest. He had nothing left but this, but somehow, that nothing was everything. The first note had been a spark. Now the melody was a flame. The flame spread, burning into memories and hearts across the market. An insectoid alien trembled, its sharp legs tapping the ground in rhythm. A glowing energy being pulsed brighter and brighter, its form flashing in colors that matched the tune. The sneering vendor tried to laugh again, but the sound died in his throat. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Impossible. No human should do this." The human opened his eyes at last, and they burned with a quiet fire. He looked at the crowd, now countless, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces caught between wonder and fear. But he did not stop. He pressed into the strings once more, and the melody shifted. It became brighter, hopeful, reaching higher, as though it sought to touch the stars above the station's dome. Aliens who had never believed in hope now felt it, as if the sound itself promised a future worth fighting for. The sneering vendor stepped back, his stall forgotten, food untouched. He had asked for a show to mock, but he had received something he could not control. The human's music was changing the air itself, and with every new note, the crowd forgot they had come for food or trade. They had come now for something else, something they had never known they wanted. When the final note of that melody rang out, it did not vanish, it stayed echoing in their minds, a phantom sound that refused to leave. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with emotions the aliens could not name. The sneering vendor stared, his lips trembling, his four eyes wide. And deep in the crowd, someone whispered, "That sound, it touched my soul." The first note had been played, and nothing in the station would ever be the same. The last echo of the melody hung in the air like a ghost. No one spoke, no one moved. The great alien market that once roared with voices now stood in silence. The human lowered his bow for only a moment, his fingers aching, his arms heavy, but his spirit was still burning. He looked at the faces in the crowd, faces of every kind, scaled, feathered, metallic, glowing, and all of them caught in the same spell. The sneering vendor who had mocked him now stared with four wide eyes, his lips pressed tight, his arrogance trembling. It was strange, almost unreal, that one starving human with a fragile wooden instrument could still an entire hall where hundreds of species shouted every hour. But the silence was not empty. It was full of feeling, thick and heavy. Like a storm waiting to break, the human took a deep breath, and the bow touched the strings again. This time the notes were softer, slower, and deeper, as if he was speaking a secret to each listener. The sound slid through the air like water, cool and gentle, but with a weight that pressed into every heart. An armored warrior, tall and scarred, lowered his weapon and bowed his head. Remembering a battlefield where his comrades had fallen one by one, a small insectoid child clung to its parent's leg, its tiny mandibles trembling as tears formed in its glassy eyes for the first time. A machine being tilted its head, its red eyes flickering as if the sound had found wires it never knew were there. The crowd was silent because they were not just hearing the music, they were living it. Every note was a story, every pause a breath of longing, every rise a cry of hope. The sneering vendor felt a strange ache in his chest, an ache he could not explain. He had mocked the human, called him weak, but now he felt weaker than ever. He tried to laugh, but no sound came, only a lump in his throat that refused to move. The music climbed higher, a slow rise, gentle but powerful. It pulled the aliens upward, into memories, into dreams, into something greater than trade, hunger, or pride. The silver-feathered bird being stretched its wings, and for the first time in years it sang softly with the notes, forgetting that it was surrounded by strangers. The glowing energy being pulsed with light and rhythm, painting the walls of the market in colors no one had ever seen before. The silence of the crowd was not fear, it was awe. No one wanted to speak. No one wanted to break the fragile beauty that hung in the air. The human's eyes were half closed, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temple, but he kept playing. He had no food, no credits, no safety. Yet in this moment he had power greater than anyone on the station, the power to touch the soul. He did not know how long he played, minutes, hours, or only seconds, but time itself seemed to bend around the sound. To the aliens, nothing else existed now. Not the smell of food, not the clatter of machines, not the flashing neon lights. Only the music. A large reptilian trader, whose kind was known for cruelty, wiped its golden eyes with the back of its claw, hoping no one saw the tears, but others were crying too. Silent tears falling down faces that had never known such weakness. The human felt his body weakening, his arms trembling harder, but he forced himself onward. Every note was his breath, every sound his heartbeat. He thought of Earth again, of oceans that sang with waves, of skies painted with sunsets, of laughter echoing in warm rooms. He thought of home, a home he had lost, and he gave that pain to the strings. The crowd received it, and in the silence of their hearts they understood for the first time. They understood what it meant to be human. The sneering vendor could no longer sneer. He gripped his stall as if it would steady him, but his eyes were wet and his throat shook. He wanted to deny it, but denial was impossible when every beat of the song was breaking him. The human finally let the last note fade into the air. It was a soft note, almost a whisper, but it carried farther than the loudest shout. The crowd remained frozen, still silent, still bound by what they had heard. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the entire station had stopped moving. Engines quieted, footsteps stilled, breaths held. The silence was deeper than anything the aliens had ever known. And when the human finally lowered his instrument, the crowd did not erupt in noise, they only stared wide-eyed, their bodies trembling with emotions they had no words for. It was a silence heavier than sound, a silence that screamed louder than any noise. The human sat, weak and pale, but in his eyes was a quiet flame. He had come only to ask for food, yet now he had shaken an entire station. The crowd had fallen silent, not because they chose to, but because they had no choice. The music had stolen their voices, stolen their pride, stolen their walls, and in that silence something new was born. Respect, fear, wonder, the sneering vendor finally whispered, his voice breaking. This should not be possible. But the silence of the crowd swallowed his words, because deep down they all knew the truth. It was possible, and it had happened. The human had played, and the station would never be the same. The market remained in silence long after the last note had faded. Aliens stood frozen, staring at the human as if they had witnessed something impossible. But silence cannot last forever, and soon whispers began to spread like ripples across water. "What power is this?" one alien murmured, its voice trembling. "Human sounds should not reach the soul," another whispered. Clutching its chest, the sneering vendor, who once mocked the starving traveler, now felt his pride burning with shame. He had wanted to laugh, to show the crowd that humans were weak. But instead, the human had stolen their attention and their hearts. The vendor's 4 eyes darted nervously as the crowd pressed closer. If he admitted defeat, his stall, his honor, even his business would be ruined, and so his sneer returned. Though weaker now, hiding fear behind teeth, he slammed one clawed hand on the counter and hissed. "This is not enough." The crowd turned toward him, anger flashing in their eyes, but he raised his arms, his voice loud and sharp. "Yes, the human plays a strange trick, yes. You all feel something you cannot explain, but is it worthy of food? Is it worthy of respect?" The silence wavered, doubt stirring like smoke. The vendor pointed one claw at the human. "If he is truly special, let him play not for us, but for the governor himself." The words fell heavy, and a gasp spread through the crowd. The governor, ruler of the station, was no simple listener. He was a towering alien, known for his cold judgment and ruthless decisions. Few dared to stand before him. Fewer still left unharmed when they failed to please him. The human, sitting pale and shaking, lifted his eyes slowly. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. His body weak, but his spirit held steady. The vendor smirked again, though his lips trembled. "If this human's music is so powerful, let him prove it in the governor's hall. If the governor is moved, I will feed him not scraps, but a feast if he fails. Let him be cast out of this station forever." The crowd buzzed. Voices rising, some cheered the challenge. Eager to see more, others hissed in protest, fearing the cruelty of such a test, but all agreed on one thing. The human's music could no longer stay hidden in the corner of a market. It must rise higher or be destroyed. The human gripped his instrument tighter. His hands trembling, he did not want fame. He did not want glory. All he wanted was food. Yet now the entire station demanded more. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening not to the voices outside, but to the quiet voice inside his heart. He could walk away, let hunger take him, or he could rise and face the challenge. And in that silence he knew there was only one path. Slowly he stood, his legs weak. "But his back straight, I will play," he said softly, his voice carrying farther than the loudest shout. The crowd erupted, some with cheers, some with gasps, some with nervous laughter, but all knew the decision was made. The sneering vendor's smirk grew sharp, though his heart pounded with fear. If the human failed, the crowd would forget, and the shame would vanish from the vendor's name. If the human succeeded, the station itself would change forever. Guards were summoned, towering figures of metal and muscle, their weapons humming with deadly power. They stepped forward, surrounding the human. Their eyes unreadable, one of them spoke, its voice like thunder. "The governor will see you." The human nodded, holding his instrument close like a lifeline. The crowd parted, watching as he was led through the wide halls of the station. Every step echoed heavy with expectation. Aliens whispered behind him, their voices rising like waves. Can he really move the governor? Will his music survive in the Great Hall? If he fails, what will become of him? The human said nothing, his eyes forward, his hand steadying the old instrument against his chest. He remembered Earth again, remembered the people who had listened to him once with smiles and tears. He thought of their faces, and it gave him strength. The guards led him deeper, past glowing gates and towering pillars carved with alien runes, until finally he entered the governor's hall. The chamber was massive, its ceiling lost in shadows, its walls lined with alien nobles in silks and armor. At the far end sat the governor, tall and cold, his skin like dark stone, his eyes glowing like embers. He raised one clawed hand and the hall fell silent. His voice was deep, shaking the air. "I hear of a human who plays sound that moves the soul. Show me this power, or be gone from my station." The human's heart pounded, but he stepped forward. He placed the instrument on his knees, his bow trembling in his hand. The governor leaned forward, his gaze sharp as blades. The nobles whispered, waiting to see a weak trick. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, prepared to strike if failure came. The human closed his eyes once more, his hunger forgotten, his fear melting into the quiet fire within. He lifted the bow and the first note began to rise. The challenge had begun. The governor's hall was unlike any place the human had ever seen. It was wide as a canyon, its ceiling stretching so high that shadows swallowed the upper arches. Columns of crystal lined the sides, glowing faintly, casting shifting colors across the marble floor. Dozens of alien nobles stood along the edges, their eyes sharp and cold, their voices whispering like snakes. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne carved from black stone, sat the governor. His body was massive, his skin like armor, his glowing eyes unblinking as they locked onto the human. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of the human's footsteps as he was led forward. The guard stepped back, leaving him in the center of the hall, small and fragile beneath the weight of so many stairs. The governor raised one clawed hand and the whispers fell silent. His voice rolled through the chamber, deep and commanding. "You are the human who stirs the market with sound. Show me this power." "Or be cast into the void," the human's heart pounded. But he held his instrument tightly. He had no choice. Hunger and fate had brought him here, and now the survival of his very soul rested in the strings of his old wooden instrument. He lowered himself to the floor, placing the instrument across his knees, the bow trembling in his weak hand. The nobles smirked, some with amusement, others with disdain. To them, humans were fragile creatures, unworthy of standing in this hall. Unworthy of catching the governor's gaze, the human closed his eyes, blocking out the whispers, blocking out the fear. He thought of Earth again, of the faces he had loved, of voices now lost. He let those memories flow into him, filling the emptiness where food should have been. Then he drew the bow across the strings, and the first note rose. It was soft at first, a whisper in the giant hall, but it carried far, bouncing off the crystals, echoing like a voice from the stars. The nobles tilted their heads, their smirks fading ever so slightly. The governor leaned forward, his glowing eyes narrowing. The human continued, his music no longer the cry of hunger but the cry of an entire world. The sound told stories, of oceans that stretched forever, of forests filled with life, of skies painted with colors no machine could capture. It told of laughter and love, of pain and loss, of dreams carried across generations. The hall grew still, the nobles' whispers gone, their gazes fixed on the fragile figure in the center. Every note grew stronger, weaving into the hearts of those who listened. The armored governor sat back, his claws tapping against the throne, but his eyes did not look away. He had ruled this station with fear, with logic, with cold laws, but never had he felt what now stirred in his chest. The human's body trembled, sweat dripping down his face, but his hands moved with precision. Every sound was alive. Every sound a blade that cut through pride and armor. A noble with feathers of gold lowered her head, tears streaking her cheeks. A mechanical lord tilted its steel face, its glowing eyes flickering as though uncertain how to process the strange feelings inside. The governor clenched his fist, but it was not in anger. It was in struggle. The music reached places even he had sealed away. The sound rose higher, filling the great hall with fire and light. The crystals in the columns began to vibrate, glowing brighter, resonating with the human song. The nobles gasped as the hall itself seemed to sing with him. The governor's eyes widened slightly, the cold glow softening. The human song shifted then, from sorrow to hope. It rose like dawn breaking after a long night. It promised not just survival, but renewal, not just pain, but healing. And the crowd felt it deep within. They saw not a weak human, but a flame carried inside fragile flesh, a flame that could not be extinguished. The nobles, once cold and distant, now leaned forward, their eyes wet, their voices silent. Even the guards, built to resist fear and feeling, stood unmoving, caught in the music's spell. The governor gripped his throne tighter, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He had seen war, he had seen death. He had seen empires rise and fall, but he had never seen this. The last note rang out, long and trembling, echoing through every corner of the vast hall. And then silence. The human lowered his bow, his arms weak, his face pale, but his eyes still burned with quiet fire. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed. The nobles looked to the governor, waiting, their bodies tense with uncertainty. The governor slowly stood, his massive frame towering over all. He stared at the human, his eyes glowing faintly, his claws curling against his sides. The silence stretched on, heavier than stone. Then the governor spoke, his voice low but carrying through the hall. "Human, your sound carries power no weapon can match." The nobles gasped. The guard stood straighter, and the sneering vendor, who had followed at the back, fell to his knees. His pride shattered. The governor's words echoed, his judgment clear. "This station will remember your music, for it is not noise. It is truth." The human bowed his head. Weak but unbroken, he had come seeking only food, but now he had been given something far greater, honor, and in that vast hall, the legend of human music was born. The last note faded. It floated into the crystal pillars, lingered in the air like smoke, and then dissolved into silence. The silence was not empty, it was heavy, crushing. Like the weight of stars pressing down on every chest, the human sat still, his bow lowered, his arms trembling with weakness, sweat dripping onto the marble floor. For a long moment, no one dared to move. The nobles stood frozen, their jeweled garments catching the dim light, their faces pale and wet with tears they did not understand. The guards, trained to resist fear and feeling, stood stiff, but their eyes betrayed them. Some shone bright with unspoken emotion, and the governor, tall and cold upon his throne, stared at the human as though he had seen a vision. The silence stretched longer and longer, until it seemed the hall itself had forgotten how to breathe. Then, like glass breaking, the silence shattered. A noble cried out, not in fear but in awe. Another alien, feathered and proud, fell to its knees, clutching its chest. A mechanical lord whispered in static, its voice trembling for the first time in centuries. The hall erupted, not in anger, not in mockery, but in a thunder of sound. Aliens roared, cried, and clapped their hands, their claws, their wings, their voices joining in a storm of applause that shook the chamber. The human lifted his head slowly, his eyes wide, his heart racing as he looked at the sea of faces. He had expected silence, maybe even punishment. But this was something far beyond survival. The governor rose from his throne, towering over all. His glowing eyes locked onto the human. He raised his clawed hand, and the storm of applause stopped at once, leaving the echo of the cheers trembling in the air. His voice rolled deep, calm, but filled with something new, something strange. "Human," he said, "your sound has moved this hall. Your song has reached into hearts that no blade, no law, no speech has touched." The nobles bowed their heads, unable to deny the truth. The sneering vendor, who had followed from the market, now trembled at the back of the hall, his pride shattered, his sneer gone. He had mocked the human, called him weak, but here was proof that weakness had turned into strength. The governor stepped closer, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. He looked down at the frail human, pale and starving, yet holding an instrument that had brought even the mightiest to tears. He spoke again, his voice softer now. "This station is built on trade, on power, on fear, but what you have shown us is beyond all of that. It is truth, and it is power of another kind," the nobles murmured, nodding, some wiping tears, others hiding their faces in shame. The human tried to stand, his legs weak, but he gripped the instrument tightly. He bowed his head, his voice quiet. "I only wanted food." The governor stared at him, and then something happened no one expected. The governor laughed, not with mockery, but with deep thundering joy. His laughter shook the walls, echoed through the crystal pillars, and rolled across the chamber. "Food you shall have," he said, "but more than food, human. You have given us something priceless." He turned to the nobles, his voice booming. "This human's gift is a weapon greater than any I have seen. Not a weapon of war, but a weapon of spirit." The crowd cheered again. Louder, the applause like a storm. The human swayed, his body faint from exhaustion, but his heart burned brighter than ever. The sneering vendor tried to slip away, but the crowd noticed him. "Is this not the one who mocked the human?" A noble hissed, "Yes," another growled. He tried to shame him. The vendor fell to his knees, trembling, but the governor raised one claw, silencing the accusations. "Let him live," the governor said coldly. "For shame is punishment enough. He will forever remember the day a starving human brought him to his knees." The vendor covered his face, his arrogance shattered. The human looked around, confused, still weak, still hungry, yet surrounded by honor he had never asked for. Servants rushed forward carrying trays of food, fruit glowing with alien light, bread steaming with warmth, meats that filled the air with rich scents. They placed it before him, a feast greater than he had ever seen. The human's hands shook as he reached for it, but he hesitated for a moment. He looked at the crowd, the nobles, the guards, even the governor himself, and he realized they were not staring at the food. They were staring at him, not at his weakness, not at his hunger, but at his music, his strength, his soul. He took a bite, the taste flooding his senses, and tears filled his eyes, not just from hunger, but from everything he had endured. The hall watched in silence, not mocking, not judging, only respecting. The governor spoke once more, his voice echoing. "Human, your song is no longer yours alone. It belongs to this station, to every ear that has heard it. It will live beyond you, whether you wish it or not." The human bowed his head again, his stomach finally easing. His body still weak, but his spirit unshaken. He had not come to be a legend, but a legend had been born anyway. The shattered silence of the governor's hall would be remembered for ages, and with it the day a human's music stunned an empire. The feast was finished, but the memory of the music remained. The human sat quietly in the great hall, his hunger eased but his heart restless. He looked around at the alien nobles, the guards, the servants, all still watching him with wide eyes, as if they expected him to play again, but he could not lift the bow. Not yet. His body was too weak, his spirit too raw. The governor leaned back on his black stone throne, his glowing eyes softer than before. "This station has seen traitors, warriors, kings, and thieves," the governor said. "But never has it seen a human change the air itself." The words echoed, heavy with meaning. The human lowered his gaze, whispering, "I am not a hero, I am not a fighter. I only played because I was hungry." The nobles murmured, some with pity, some with admiration. Yet the truth was clear. The human had given them something none of their riches could buy, and news travels fast in places where many species meet. By the next morning, whispers of the performance spread across the entire station. Merchants spoke of a human whose sound made warriors weep. Travelers carried the story into docking bays. Pilots repeated it in cantinas. Smugglers whispered it in shadows. "The human who plays the stars," they called him. The title grew, and with it the legend. Not everyone welcomed it. Some aliens feared it, whispering, "If one human can move the heart of the governor, what power do their kind truly hold?" Others craved it, saying, "If this music can change us, then we must have it, we must own it, we must use it." The human walked the markets the next day, food now given freely, smiles and stares following him wherever he went. But behind the stares he saw something else. Expectation. They did not see a starving traveler anymore, they saw a symbol that could inspire hope or spark fear. The sneering vendor hid in shame, avoiding the human's gaze, his pride forever broken. The governor's words still echoed in the human's mind. "Your song is no longer yours alone." It weighed on him heavier than hunger ever had. He sat by the edge of the station's great viewing dome that night, his instrument resting across his knees. The stars stretched endless before him. Shining against the black, he thought of Earth far away, and wondered if anyone there knew what had happened. He thought of the people he had lost, of faces and voices that no music could ever bring back. And yet, he also thought of the crowd in the market, the silence in the governor's hall, the way the galaxy itself seemed to stop when the first note rose. Maybe, he thought, the music had a purpose greater than survival. Maybe it was not only for him. As he played softly beneath the stars, a small group gathered quietly behind him, aliens of different shapes and colors. None spoke, none mocked, they only listened, and once again, the silence grew heavy, beautiful, full of meaning. The legend grew not from shouts, but from silences like this. Soon, ships leaving the station carried tales of a human whose music bent the soul. Some said it healed wounds, others said it broke armies, others whispered it could even awaken machines. The truth was simpler, yet greater. His music made them feel. And in a galaxy built on fear, trade, and cold logic, that was the most dangerous gift of all. The human did not seek riches, he did not seek crowns, but still the galaxy began to whisper his name. Some called him a gift, others a threat, and so the legend spread. Carried from world to world, station to station, the governor himself declared, "Let it be known, the human who plays shall be honored on this station, for his song is proof that power does not always come from claw or blade." But the governor also warned, his voice dark, "This gift will bring enemies, for what cannot be controlled will always be feared." The human listened. His heart heavy, he had won food, he had won respect, but he had also gained a burden he never asked for. Still, when he closed his eyes and touched the strings, he knew he could not stop because music was not only survival, it was life. The station would never forget the silence that his song created. nor the storm of applause that shattered it, and beyond the station the galaxy itself began to listen. A legend was born, not of war, not of kings, but of a starving human with a fragile wooden instrument. He had asked only for food, but he had given them something far greater, and as the stars watched from the endless dark, his melody rose once more, not for survival, not for glory, but because it was the truth of his soul, and the truth once heard can never be silenced.